Hello and welcome back to my channel. Subscribe, like and comment your thoughts down below. When we talk about articism being there, trust me, it is. You only realize that articism is there when you are the victim. Now, articism has a long and complex history with manifestations varying across different societies and time periods. In various parts of the world, articism has been deeply rooted in discriminatory beliefs and practices based on perceived racial or ethnic differences. Now, historical examples include slavery, colonialism, segregation, and institutionalized discrimination. In today's video, a black old lady breaks down as she shares how she was caught the word for trying to go to McDonald's as a kid in Chicago's in the 1960s. Now, she also shares how she feels that a lot of black people were scared and intimidated by palm color people in the 60s. She also shares her other experiences at college and how she was treated by a palm color woman at the education department. Here's the video as she narrates her experiences. I will be right back.
I was raised primarily on 75th and Morgan. We, for a while, could not go past Ashland, and then we could not go past Damon. So about 10 years prior to this incident that happened to me in college, I was about 18, about 10, maybe 10 years prior. Everybody liked McDonald's, but McDonald's were not very plentiful in black communities. And they had finally built one that was kind of close, but not real close. And so one day I just got brazen enough. I had some money and I got brazen enough and said, I'm going to go to McDonald's. I did not ask for permission. I just decided I was going. My sister that's next to me, I put her on the seat of my bike because that's how we rolled back in the day. And she rode on the back of my bike. And then I went and stopped by another girlfriend of mine's house, and we all decided we're going to go. But in order to go to this McDonald's, it was on 79th Street and it was past Damon. So we rolled down 76th Street, and instead of going over to 79th Street, which probably would have been better, we were kind of afraid of riding in the busy streets. So we kept going down 76th Street and we turned on a residential block. When we turned on the residential block, it was in the summertime and all people were outside on their front yards and all of that. And all of a sudden we started hearing this chorus, "Let's go home, let's go home." I had never been called it before, but I'm pretty sure I knew that was something bad. And it was scary the way they were saying it. But for some reason, I didn't know what to do. First, I didn't know what to do. My friend that came with us, she rolled off and left me and my sister. And I decided that I wasn't going to be no day. So I got off my bike. I put my sister behind me and I told her, don't move. My daddy had given me a chain, and it wasn't a chain like you go to the store and buy and it's all neat and stuff. He had cut it off of another chain, and it was to lock my bike up, and it had a lock on the end of it. And I took it, I unwrapped it from my bike, and I wrapped it around my hand, and I just stood there with my sister behind me because something was going to happen, but I wasn't going to be there that day. So eventually, I don't know how I got the strength to put my sister back on the bike and get back on the bike. But we got away from there. And I went back home and I told my mom. And my mama put us in the car. She was real angry. But I don't know where the people went, because when we went back to the block, everybody was inside. I have never been so scared in my life. But I couldn't let nothing happen to my sister because my father had always drilled in my head that I had to take care of my sisters. And I think that's probably why I just stopped and stood there. I don't know if I would have done that if I had been alone. But even to this day, my sister and I talk about this. And this has been well over 50 years ago almost. And we still feel the pain of just wanting to go to McDonald's like every other child. The last time I told this story, I did the same thing. I just want to add this. I did everything I could and prayed so hard that my children would never have to be called her, would never have somebody threaten them like my sister and I experienced. And I thought you all were going to make it. And it seems like we're going right back to that same place. Not being able to process why are these people so angry with me? Why are they calling me this? Why wasn't I supposed to ride across the street anyway? Why? Nobody ever talked about that. I think that when I was growing up, Black folks just accepted some things. This is just the way it is. And like I said, even, with the exception of this really, really poignant thing that my mom said to me at 10, which really, again, is one of those things I will never forget. And it did change my perspective to some degree. And of course, she followed it up with other things. She put me in charm school and, other things like that to try to help me. But yes, I think that if we hadn't been so afraid to talk about that, Black folks would scare people. I mean, I grew up afraid of people. I grew up feeling intimidated by folks. I grew up not feeling like I was as good as they were. And if you hear a tinge of anger in my voice, I'm still mad as hell about that. Because I feel like maybe my ACT scores wouldn't have been as low as they were if I had felt like I had a chance or I was as good as they were. So yes, it should have been talked about. We should have been empowered. But it was the time. It was just the time. People were afraid. Did not make good decisions in high school. My ACT scores were very low. And I was able to get into school through a special program. But once I entered college, I really enjoyed the coursework. I knew I always wanted to be an educator. So after my first year, I went to declare my major, and they had actually wanted you to wait until your second year. But I knew I wanted to be a teacher. So I went to the Department of Education, and I will never, ever forget this as long as I live. And this lady, Marie Gunther, came to the counter where I had completed my paperwork. And she looked at my paperwork, and she looked at me, and she looked at my records, and she said, "According to your ACT scores, you shouldn't have lasted a quarter here." I was crushed. But I was determined. I couldn't, first of all, believe that anybody who was in the field of education, especially higher education, would say something like that to somebody. But this is what it is, and this is what it's always been. But it inspired me to study extremely hard because the program that I was in was designed for me to stay there 5 years. I graduated in 4 years on the honors, on the dean's list. And it was a pleasure to go back and find this same woman still in this department and be able to slam my paperwork down on the counter for declaration of graduation 4 years after she made that comment. That was certainly one of the hardest things to deal with, but it also inspired me throughout other obstacles in my life. Probably because it just reminded me of other negative things that have been said to me that I, for a while, allowed to keep me down. I don't think I'm much different than some people when you encounter a lot of negativity. I experienced quite a bit of negativity growing up, and it really beat down my self-esteem for a while. And I guess maybe I just finally reached a point where I was tired of being underestimated and wanted to even prove to myself that I could do more than what people were expecting of me.
Now, just from her story, you can imagine how bad articism was back then. I'm not saying it's no longer there because we see and face it most of the time, even though progress has been made over time, but the impacts of historical articism continue to influence contemporary societal structures and inequalities. Now, when you compare racial discrimination from now to the 60s, there's a huge difference, whether it be from the way they used to teach different schools, one for those who are palm color and those who are black, or the protests that go on today, the mass terror blacks had to go through living in the 60s, to the fear of being pew-pewed by an officer today just because of the color of their skin. Racial discrimination has always been around, and people have and will always fight against it. No matter the circumstances, they are willing to protest in the streets, sit in public restaurants where they aren't allowed to, refuse to give up their seat, take a knee, and state their dreams to the world. Now, if you look back at the 60s and how different racial discrimination was compared to now, you'd probably cringe. It's violent and bloody. Now, in the 1950s and 1960s, McDonald's used the same laissez-faire approach to customer relations, allowing local law, custom, and manager preference to dictate service to African Americans. Like the earlier 5 and dime lunch counters, the local franchises of modern fast food chains retained autonomy over service issues. Now, palm-color Southern entrepreneurs who started fast food chains and purchased national franchises maintained local racial mores. There's little evidence of how black Southerners negotiated the walk-up service windows that all customers used in the early years of fast food service, but discriminatory customs dictating that palm-color people be served before black customers may have regulated the racial interactions at McDonald's service counters. Now, automobiles and suburban shopping centers encouraged proprietors to build away from downtown areas. In the post-war era, palm-color Southerners tended to move away from the cities into the suburbs, so restaurant location and residential segregation may have limited black access to these public spaces. Ed Wilbur Hardy located his first Hardy's hamburger restaurant near a college that at the time admitted only palm-color students. So segregation and discrimination were practiced at McDonald's locations and at other chains in the South. 3 years after activist merchants and city officials negotiated to desegregate the downtown lunch counters in North Carolina, students staged a stand-in demonstration at the local McDonald's, which despite lacking a dining room, refused to allow equal service. When McDonald's implemented indoor seating in the midst of civil rights sit-in activism, many Southern franchises practiced racial segregation even when other local eateries had abolished the practice. Now, racial segregation is the practice of restricting people to certain circumscribed areas of residence or to separate institutions, e.g. schools, churches, and facilities, parks, playgrounds, restaurants, restrooms, on the basis of race or alleged race. Now, racial segregation provides a means of maintaining the economic advantages and superior social status of the politically dominant group, and in recent times, it has been employed primarily by palm-color populations to maintain their ascendancy over other groups by means of legal and social color bars. Historically, however, racial segregation has appeared in all parts of the world where there are multiracial communities, except where racial amalgamation occurred on a large scale, as in Hawaii and Brazil. In such countries, there has been occasional social discrimination, but not legal segregation. In the southern states of the United States, on the other hand, legal segregation in public facilities was current from the late 19th century into the 1950s. The civil rights movement was initiated by Southern blacks in the 1950s and 60s to break the prevailing pattern of racial segregation. Now, this movement spurred passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which contained strong provisions against discrimination and segregation in voting, education, and use of public services. Now, elsewhere, racial segregation was practiced with the greatest rigor in South Africa, where under the apartheid system, it was an official government policy from 1950 until the early 1990s. In the US history, any of the set of rules based on the concept that enslaved persons were property, not persons. Inherent in the institution of slavery were certain social controls which enslavers amplified with laws to protect not only the property but also the property owner from the danger of slave violence. Now, talking about black people being scared of palm-color people, I don't know if we should call it fear or avoiding trouble, because many are the times that palm-color people regularly call the police on black people who are doing nothing wrong, not only because of misplaced fear, but as a method of regulating access to shared space. Calling the police in these instances is about having the power to say, you don't belong here. Now, a professor of urban studies said that the issue of who is feared and who is seen as having a right to be in a certain space is deeply intertwined with race and the US history of segregation. Firstly, palm-color people's fearful reactions to people of color or black people is itself a means of dictating who gets to feel comfortable in a public space. In a 2004 study on American men's experience of being feared in public spaces. Researcher Kristen Day found a stark difference in responses from palm-colored people, black people, and men of color. While a few palm-colored men said they were not aware of ever being feared by others as they moved through a public space, no black and Hispanic respondent was able to say the same. Now, contemporary attempts to regulate black people in shared spaces can be linked back to the U.S. history of racial segregation. While legal segregation was struck down more than 50 years ago, American society is still rife overwhelmingly with palm-colored neighborhoods, malls, schools, restaurants, universities, workplaces, religious institutions, and other associations. Desegregation efforts didn't bring about actual racial integration, as Kevin Cruz, a history professor at Princeton University, notes in his 2005 paper. Instead, it created a new division in which the public world was abandoned to blacks and a new private one was created for palm-colored people. Now, this de facto segregation has reinforced a situation in which it is the norm for black people to be typically absent, not expected, or marginalized when present in shared spaces, ranging from Ivy League universities to middle-class suburbs. Elijah Anderson, a sociology professor at Yale University, notes in his 2014 paper, "It's in these spaces where many social rewards lie, from having a nice night out on the town to accessing good education, employment, and money. There are severe consequences when black people enter these palm-colored people spaces." Now, almost any palm-colored person present in the palm-colored space can possess and wield this enormous power of excluding or bringing harm to black people who enter these spaces, Anderson notes in his paper, and those who feel especially exercised and threatened by the rise of blacks may feel most compelled to wield that power. For some palm-colored people, the presence of a black person in a shared palm-color dominated space becomes a threatening symbol of black advancement at the expense of palm-colored people. While certainly not all are guilty of such acts, many can be mobilized in complicity to protect the palm-color space, he adds. Now, today, protecting the palm-color space often takes the form of making an unnecessary phone call to the police. Articism is always about power. The incident at Yale is a stark reminder of the lengths to which some palm-colored people are willing to go to ensure that black people feel out of place, like all the time. Thank you for watching. See you in my next video.